Cool. Let's kick things off then. So happy to get things started. A very brief intro to me. I'm Ben. I'll be moderating the panel. I'm the co-founder of Gensyn, as it says up there. Gensyn is the network for machine intelligence. Most people know us as the compute protocol that we build that connects together machine learning capable compute devices and allows anyone to run machine learning operations on those devices kind of at any point in time, scale infinitely across the world's compute devices. But enough about me. I want to jump to the panel. And just one note on this panel. We want to make this a debate, ideally. So we'll try and find a spicy topic that there's some kind of disagreement on. We've been chatting behind the scenes to figure out what that is. It's not necessarily what it says up there, but we'll see what happens, and we'll try and dig in on the bits that get controversial. But I'll let the panel introduce themselves first.
So hi, I'm Alex. So I work at the Ethereum Foundation, where I do kind of research in between form verification and AI. We're doing a lot of cool things, around form verification, and hopefully we're going to find cool ways to use AI as part of that.
Oh, hey, I'm Regan from PIN.AI. We were trying to build a coordination layer for personal AI. Within PIN.AI, we got like 3 major components. One is the we call it like a data protocol that tries to integrate the data for people, so that we will be able to feed the data for the model on device, so that you will have like a personalized AI. And then we have agent service protocol that we will enable the agent will be able to plug into the network, so that it can provide a service to the intents generated by the personal AI. And also we have a decentralized intent matching protocol in the sense that will be doing a match between the intent generated by the personal AI and the AI agents within our ecosystem.
Hey guys, I'm Jonathan. You saw me present earlier. So at Exabits, we are providing both a localized compute, so bare metal and virtual machine, and then we are, in the future, we'll offer cloud-based compute, so leveraging a consortium of all our GPUs that we have from our partners to provide more efficient and cheaper compute to the network.
Hi, my name is Advait. Very nice to meet you all. And I'm the founder of Peri Labs, and what at Peri Labs we do is essentially, our fundamental thesis is that large language models will be used to solve like unsolved ad hoc problems on edge devices. And the reason that I say this is because mathematician Terence Tao rated GPT-4o as an incompetent graduate student. O1 was rated as a mediocre graduate student. This is a step change, but what that signals is there will be an exponential shift in what these models can do in the long run. And so fundamentally, we looked at the structure of edge devices today, and what we found was that there is currently an inefficiency in the sense that devices themselves are growing linearly with Moore's law. So this is how processing power is growing, whereas model complexity over the past years is growing exponentially. And so fundamentally, what we build is the infrastructure to bring larger models onto smaller devices. And additionally, what we believe is not everything will happen on the device itself. So there will be a split between like on-device compute and then compute inside of a decentralized inferencing network. And so essentially what we're building is the compression infrastructure to bring models onto these edge devices, and then the inferencing network for larger computational workloads.
Nice. So I guess to get things started and to level set, does somebody want to explain currently within AI workflows what is local and what is cloud-based right now? Let's do this as like just jump in. We don't need to go through everyone every time. If you have something to say, just jump in. But I don't know if somebody wants to kick us off with that.
Yeah, for us, I was asked to take the cloud-based approach, but on a local side, it's basically dedicated compute GPU resources that are focused on one simple task and one simple workload, whether it be privacy preserving or even smaller LLM models.
Got it. Does somebody, so from a kind of, from a remote perspective, that makes sense. Does somebody want to explain the other side?
So I'd say, like, in terms of what actually happens in the cloud, you see the use of the largest models happening on the cloud because essentially you actually have enough compute to be able to run the largest models, such as like the GPT models, then also like the Claude range of models. So on the cloud side of things, like what you can be assured of is essentially like there is a guaranteed stable infrastructure to be able to run larger models, and you can scale it as like you get servicing requests. So in terms of like the state of the world today, like what happens on the cloud is in terms of all of the like proprietary models working like closed source models, they all operate in terms of a cloud approach instead of a local approach. And what we see today is on the local side of things, there's a lot more usage of open source on-device models to essentially like be utilized for like different kinds of tasks, such as, for example, a great example to showcase both is actually Cursor. So, or like, for example, like code editors. So you could use like a off-the-shelf like open source model to plug into your code editor, or you could use Cursor, which actually gives you access to Claude inside the code editor. And essentially, this is how developer workflows look today. So the larger models go onto the cloud, whereas smaller models tend to stay on the device itself. But yeah, we'd love to hear more what the other panelists think.
Yeah. So actually for us, I think there is a very clear distinction with regards to what runs on local versus runs on the cloud, in the sense that we want all the sensitive data to be remaining on device. So that we would have the kind of on-device model. So, for example, your SSN, your credit card, or even like your private key. So we want the on-device model to be a gatekeeper for all these sensitive informations. Because we were building a coordination layer for the personal AI. So data privacy is the key for all our ecosystem. So potentially, we would like as much as things that can be done on the local, whereas for those tasks that cannot be done in the local, we would send that to the cloud. But also on the cloud side, we also try to make the data privacy and run using the PCC or in the TE environment, in the sense that in all the process that the data privacy is protected.
So I think maybe just to add on this, and I completely agree with the privacy aspect of it, I think another aspect that makes me a bit more excited about running things locally is around the reliability and the security model. That as soon as I've downloaded it and I'm running it with Erlama on my laptop, I know that obviously unless someone actually compromises my machine, it won't be tampered with. And obviously we've had examples of Claude or GPT just going off the rails for a few hours in starting to speak Spanish or something, and for a lot of things, like it's not that big a deal. It's kind of funny when it happens, but the more and more you start using AI and maybe even embedding it in, the workflow of large organizations or doing things at runtime, then that becomes a big reliability issue. And if you're running it locally, at least you kind of know what you're dealing with, and maybe that's a bit better. I think the other side of this is that kind of running things locally, from that a few other things flow. So the idea that you would run smaller models that are more specialized, maybe you coordinate them with some central model that kind of picks the ideal model for different tasks that you prompt for. And so I think local for me also implies kind of a few more things around how we develop and think about AIs than just running a model locally.
So I understand the reasons on the local execution that you mentioned, but is there not an enormous efficiency trade-off there? We talk about the kind of efficiency of cloud compute versus local compute. It's obviously a lot smaller. How do we deal with that?
We use Claude.
Use what? Sorry,
Claude.
Oh, fair enough.
But I think that there are kind of a lot of trade-offs, and I think maybe part of it is, I would love to run everything locally. In practice, I obviously can't run everything locally. In some ways, that also restricts what I can do. So we had a talk earlier around kind of auditing, smart contracts for vulnerabilities and things like this. To a large extent, if I had a smart contract that I want to deploy that might have a critical vulnerability, I'd also be very reticent to try and audit it with a cloud-based model, because then I'm sending potentially a critical vulnerability and that smart contract code to a server, and that might end up in training, and it might end up just being spat out to someone that does a prompt. And a lot of companies, I think, have been very sensitive about like not allowing their employees to use GPT-4, Claude, because they don't want their actual code to just come out from the training set. But I think, yeah, in practice, obviously, I use Claude more than I use models that run on my laptop. And the question for me is then, what's the right tipping point at which I commit to try and running everything locally, even if maybe I take a trade-off for somewhat ideological reasons? And how much better are large models that I can't run locally going to get? How much better are local models that I can run locally going to get? And are we going to finally at some point get good user experience with local models, just not just running things in my terminal? Because that's something that, with Claude, you have artifacts. That's been really fun to use for a lot of tasks. It's not something that at the moment we have in any way, shape or form with local models. So even aside of performance, I think there's kind of many other things we need to get, better on the local side to really not just rely on cloud-based applications.
Yeah, I think it depends on some like use cases. For example, you want to kind of book a flight ticket or book for vacation. I think it really doesn't matter that the whole kind of request takes like 2 seconds versus like 4 seconds, right? But in some, for example, like some Web3 agents in our scenario that you want to find the best price that you can purchase the ETH or some tokens, then that could potentially be very time sensitive. So I think it really depends on the scenarios and the use cases that we want to deal with here.
Yeah, from our perspective, we think that in the future, everything should be cloud-based. So there's going to be FHE and ZK, and that's going to be much cheaper to implement. So right now, when our customers say, okay, we want ZK, that's like another cost that we have to add in another service provider. We have to add on top of it. But in the future, it's like Moore's Law, right? Like everything gets built faster, everything becomes faster and cheaper. So from our perspective, local-based cloud will exist in very sensitive industries like healthcare or even like financial data. But in the future, more and more industries will go towards cloud.
I think you make a great point there. So essentially, like, it's very important to actually look at use cases when you're thinking about this debate. So essentially, yes, in the case of healthcare, for sure, there's a lot of like benefits to actually using local models. And also, like, essentially, on-device AI is probably going to become a very large part of the healthcare domain. The way that it will manifest is essentially, you will see the use of like vision language models in like equipment such as, for example, endoscopes, or even like robots that have on the other end of the spectrum, like attached to surgical cameras that are connected to like teleprompting. And so essentially, like on the other end of the spectrum, you have like higher performance device that will also run vision language models and be able to actually like perform surgeries. And in this case, essentially here, you would really care about the latency side of things, and you would care about privacy as well. So when you think about, like, I guess, applications where local will trump cloud, I guess the two aspects to stress on are probably around latency and privacy of the data. And as you pointed out, so essentially healthcare is a great example of such a domain, but also other domains would be like, for example, in the finance segment, and then also autonomous vehicles are actually a very interesting and exciting application of local AI as well. And similarly, like you'll see like the use of vision language models in drones. And so here I'd say like local is going to make a lot of sense. Whereas essentially like Alexander, to your point, like for most tasks, you would probably be better off like using a frontier model if it's a generalized task. But when you have like very specific tasks where you have this setting that is a low latency setting where you need to like actually do a mission critical task, and in that case you would use a domain specific model that's fitted onto the edge device to be able to perform that task.
Interesting. So I guess to paraphrase what we've just talked about, it sounds like we might have discovered the point of contention in potentially a prediction of the future of hardware. So from the sort of local privacy preserving perspective, there's this prediction that more and more computation is going to be happening locally, i.e. our local devices are probably going to get more powerful. Whereas from what you were saying, Jonathan, actually our personal devices could be just dumb terminals essentially that are accessing this cloud-based system. I suppose my big question then is, do we actually think we can solve all of those privacy problems with the remote techniques, FHE, MPC, etc., like you mentioned? Are they enough to actually bridge the gap for those privacy use cases?
Well, I think what a possibility is just like multi-party encryption. So there's going to be different ways, right? Like, so you can do computation on one device and then federated learning as another stack, FHE, and even gamify. Right? Like, I like how Gensyn has gamified the token mechanics of ensuring that, okay, each player down to the cell phone level is capable of providing compute. So that's something, it's more on like a mechanism play and optimizing for cost to make it more efficient for everyone, that it becomes like you don't have to second guess these types of stacks that you want to add as a part of it.
Quick question / contention there is that essentially, like in this scenario where you're applying, let's say, like FHE in the cloud, let's say that the attack works fundamentally, aren't you going to add like an extra layer of latency as opposed to if the model was operating on that device itself? In that case, you would ensure that like there are privacy guarantees. So essentially, like you mentioned earlier that like I guess we would be using like the cloud for all ranges of applications. But then if latency does become a constraint, do you think that that world will still play out?
It might be a problem, right? But the way that I see it is that as like the age-old question of like Moore's law will address that and make latency less and less of a problem, right? So the way that we're building it is that we're first focusing on how efficient can we build the model. And then on the other side, we are doing a lot of research on how to make the 4090s as performant as the A100s or even the H100s. Just so we see that there's going to be more and more devices that we can leverage and stack on top of each other to try to reduce that latency. The latency issue of like just having more and more different things sort of coordinate with each other, that's always going to be a latency problem at first. But I think from our end, what we've seen in the acceleration process is something that we can eventually address and sort of keep in mind that it's something that I don't know how to like bring it back together, but worry less and less about.
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure whether we will be able to defer all the kind of a privacy-related data to the cloud, given the kind of a technology landscape we have right now, and also the service level for all the service we have right now in this field. Yeah, so. In terms of privacy, from my own perspective, I think local is always the king. Yeah. So like even for myself, for the sensitive data, I don't want it to be stored in like iCloud or Google Drive. So for example, everybody has like a private key, right? Will you guys be storing your private key in your iCloud or Google Drive? I really don't think so. I think the kind of the safest way is still to kind of write it down and then put it somewhere in your safe locker box. So from that sense, I think for the privacy concern, definitely it should be on the local side. But what we envision is that in the future, it definitely would be like a hybrid model. So it will not like be fully local or like a fully remote. Yeah, some critical And privacy preserving tasks should be run locally, while the rest complicated stuff that could be run in the cloud.
And I think maybe to kind of latch onto this as well, one thing with the cloud is that the cloud isn't new, right? We've had the cloud for many, many applications for many, many years at this point. And I think at this point, one lesson from that as well is also that it's been convenient, but it's also locked a lot of people into service providers who in the end, kind of turn things around and, they obviously try and profit from some dominant market position. You might obviously, your account can get closed at a moment's notice, and you have kind of massive trade-offs between the convenience of the cloud and how reliable that is in the long run, whether it's financially or in terms of the service you get once you have some cloud provider with a dominant position. And I think with hardware, and the cloud will always have better hardware, but then hardware also has a tendency to concentrate and to have kind of network effects that big providers benefit from. And maybe at some point you decide to delegate too many things to the cloud, and the cloud service providers get bigger and bigger, and then it's very hard to manage the power imbalance between yourself, your company, and some insane AWS scale behemoths of kind of cloud services. And then you're locked in forever, and it becomes much harder to actually do things locally ever again.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we've got somewhat annoyingly for a debate consensus that some stuff is gonna sit locally and some stuff is gonna sit in the cloud, and there's various reasons why. And I liked what you said about the kind of the cloud in the sort of legacy sense, and then there's the cloud in the sort of new decentralized sense, which lifts a lot of the restrictions that you described, which is super exciting. I guess one interesting thing is that a lot of technology has progressed so far in that like cloud world, right? And we've talked about blurring local in the cloud and doing bits locally, bits on the cloud. Is there not a technical barrier to doing that, particularly with AI? NVIDIA obviously have a pretty strong hold on the execution of AI models. The way that they work in most frameworks is quite intrinsically tied to CUDA. When it comes to doing some local execution, we're going to want to do that on phones and laptops and things like that. Does that present a barrier to having this kind of merged future in some way?
Yes, it'll be really annoying.
I think it's more of an orchestration problem. It's basically just figuring out like which tasks are going to be better for on-device settings, and then which tasks are going to be better for a decentralized cloud or a centralized cloud, and then essentially like I guess allocating the tasks efficiently across the different like set of compute that you can access.
Yeah. One of our investors had that question for us, right? Like, what if NVIDIA suddenly restricts anyone for participating in like a decentralized network, right? And that was one of the key questions that we said that we had to address. And as of now, like we've been operating in that sense for the longest time. In the future, that's one of the reasons why we said, okay, since we have a lot of experience building and scaling up different data centers, we have now been internally testing building our own like chips and GPUs from like the research standpoint, and also working with a whole bunch of different service providers, whether it be Dell, HP, or any of those guys who build GPUs.
Oh yeah, so I think for us, and just one thing, one point to add is that I think there will be a orchestration layer in terms of like task dispatch and where to go from the answers for your specific task. And like in our ecosystem, we would like this orchestration layer at your local device in the sense that it will serve as like a gatekeeper.
Got it. Interesting. Okay, so there's been a bunch of kind of technical things here, technical reasons why it's beneficial to do things in different places. And then I think in the privacy discussion, we touched on like almost like product things, like user demands, where maybe actually technically you can execute privacy preserving machine learning on a remote device, but a user is going to sit back and say, I still don't trust it. I want it to execute locally, etc. I guess in the kind of, as a final question for everybody, How do you think about navigating that within your projects? So you've got this kind of prediction of the future where the sort of maybe there's going to be a blurring between local and remote. Maybe actually there's going to be kind of a doubling down on remote. But the user demands right now might exist in a kind of different way, and you're going to have to take users through to this new vision that you have of how things will execute. How do you take that journey?
What we've been offering right now, like I said earlier, is all basically local compute. But in the future, we see that as, like we said earlier, a very limiting factor, right? So with all the GPUs that we have within our network, we hope to make an orchestration layer that combines those resources to make it super fast and ensure to our customers that, okay, one is SOC 2 compliant, one is HIPAA compliant, to just on one interface, they can from a click of a button, they can access all their parameters that they wish, and get it in the simplest form as you do in AWS. So I think by focusing on the decentralized component that it's uncensorable from like AWS would always keep on the back of their mind. I think that's a way for us to sort of bring the crowd into adapting the decentralized contribution model of GPUs.
So for us right now, our engineering architecture is architected in a way that we have a hybrid model, in the sense that we have the on-device local model, and also we have the model hosted in the TE environment in cloud. And the load could potentially be dynamically shifted between the local model and the cloud model. So that would provide us flexibility in the future, in the sense that what task that could potentially be done on local side versus in the cloud side. As long as we change the logic in the orchestration layer on our device, that we will be able to route different traffic to different components. So we don't want to be kind of stuck in a situation to say, hey, we are all in kind of on device or in cloud. Because I think in this kind of AI world, no matter it's like for local AI or cloud AI, it really doesn't matter like where that this runs. But the most important thing is regarding your data, because data is essentially a thing that powers your AI. So we just want to make sure that your data will be strictly protected. And then whether the task will be done kind of locally versus in the cloud, that could be potentially adjusted in the future. Yeah.
That's a very similar approach and a world model to the one that we're using. I guess a great comparable is essentially the way that Apple Intelligence actually works is like you have like a smaller model that will work on the iPhones that communicates with a larger model that runs in a private cloud. So essentially, I'd say that what's going to end up happening across every edge device and also every like local computational workload is that essentially all of the more like latency sensitive or critical tasks or simpler tasks will actually be handled on the device itself. So we would be talking about 70 to 90% of the computational tasks being handled on the device itself. And then 10 to 30% of the workloads would be happening in the cloud. And so essentially, that's the world model that we are using. And we foresee that essentially there will be a balance between the usage of the two as we go forward. And I agree with your worldviews, Jonathan and Regan.
So I think I'll have a slightly different perspective, just because I think I'm the only person here who's speaking first and foremost as a user rather than as someone who's building infrastructure or developing models. I think for me, some of what I do, I'll continue doing with large models online for kind of day-to-day routine work that isn't privacy sensitive, that doesn't rely too much on any kind of reliability, where if the website goes offline, it's not a problem. But I think something that I really have in mind is maybe at the point where we start running more tasks through agents and things like this, and particularly if we start running more, kind of personal life and other kind of sensitive tasks that rely on private data or things like this. And at that point, I think I'll try and run things probably essentially locally. I don't expect to be in the majority. I think a lot of users around the world will run things in the cloud, and it won't matter to them in the same way that a lot of other privacy-sensitive things just happen on the cloud. And I think then my main concern actually really becomes, can we coexist between being able to run things locally with a decent level of performance and decent user experience, when obviously cloud providers will be able to provide kind of maybe more competitive in terms of cost or better service in terms of performance, and in finding out ways to kind of maybe even fund that kind of development for local AI. And if I want to give sudo to an agent on my machine, I would much prefer to have that agent be stored on my machine and not somewhere else, so that I can look at it as much as I can and things like this. And the other option to see is that we actually get kind of better transparency, more cryptography deployed on the cloud and tooling like this. But that's also something that I think isn't ready yet, and that would always have caveats either in terms of performance or in terms of there are limits to what it can do, particularly when it comes to privacy. At some point you're still sending a prompt at some instance, unless you're assuming some cloud MPC that can run a neural net over encrypted data, which I think is not something that we're close to having in any shape or form.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you, everyone. If things have resonated with you that's been set up here, please grab people and chat to them about it. And if you're thinking of developing in the cloud or locally, talk to the relevant person for that. But yeah, thank you, everyone.